Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This is the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again with your host Nick Scopes and the Gregolicious. You know how we do, cause you know we keeping it gangster and silly. Unplugged like a full swung titty. Bout get jitty, cause you know we down to the nitty and the gritty. And we make shit sound so damn pretty. Yeah, cause this unhinged comedy. And right now you're in the mix. So get ready, cause we about to get it poppin'. And we ain't stopping.
Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again. Yeah, we at it again. Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again. Yeah, we at it again. Yeah, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Mangina Dialogues. I am your host, Nick Scopes.
And I'm the Gregolicious.
And today, our guest is Patrick Hinds. What's up, man?
Hey, guys. How are ya?
How are you, sir? How are the Berkshires?
Nice. I got to tell you, we live in New York City usually, and it's very nice to experience fresh air whenever you feel like it.
Why are you in the Berkshires? Why'd you escape New York City?
Well,
Yeah.
we have a 6-year-old daughter, and we just thought, okay, when they were putting the shelter in place in order, we were like, we live in about 900 square feet, so we realized that that was not going to do it for her, and so we were like, let's find a place with a yard, and I guess just go there indefinitely, which is what we did. So here we are.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, we're in Connecticut, right outside the city.
Oh, nice.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy what's going on right now. So we also should say that Patrick is from and the co-host of the True Crime Obsessed podcast. They only have 3 million listeners a month or something insignificant. I mean,
Almost as many as us. Almost.
One day we hope to be as popular as you. Thanks a lot
God.
for taking the time to chat with us on very weird world circumstances.
So bizarre.
But what better way to get caught up on your favorite podcasts or anything else you're getting caught up on?
That's true.
So let's talk about your podcast.
Sure.
You not specialize, but you're all about the whole, how would you describe it? How would you describe your podcast?
Yeah, so True Crime Obsessed, it's a true crime comedy podcast where my co-host Jillian Tensavali and we recap true crime documentaries. So basically we watch, the popular true crime documentary of the moment. We watch it separately and we take really serious notes on it. It usually takes me 6 hours or so to get through the whole thing. And then we get together and we sort of just recap it. We sort of talk about it and our observations and the funny, weird things that stood out to us. And, we play clips from the documentary to sort of show the listeners what we're talking about. We're always really careful to say that, though we are a comedy podcast, we never make fun of the victims and we never make fun of the crime. We always find the humor in either how mad we get at the thing that happened or, the idiot prosecutor or the dumb cop or whatever it is. It's that's sort of where the humor comes from.
Yeah, it's, I was reading a bunch of the reviews and feedback on Apple about your podcast, and it's hard to make your way through 18,000 of them, but I did my best, and I don't know if I got top to bottom all 18,000, but I read enough. And the common or the similar theme throughout all of them is that while you're obviously talking about dark stuff, crime, murder, whatever it might be, that you guys keep it incredibly light and fun and in a fun way to talk about it, which, I think is really interesting because I am not an avid, consumptioner of that style of media. Right. But just, taking a quick glance through some of your episodes and listening to clips and stuff and watching what's on your website. And it really is a unique spin on how to tackle that normally dark subject. That's not like watching 48 hours or 60 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. It's so funny because, when Jillian and I decided to do this, we were new friends. We didn't know each other very well. And we had both been making other podcasts like in the Broadway world. And we both wanted to make a true crime podcast. And so we're like, well, let's do that together. And we had this idea for this like really straightforward, nerdy sort of like, segmented show where we would like do an interview for a segment. And then we would talk about like a documentary that we had watched in like a nerdy, film critic kind of way. And then we would do like a news segment. And when we sat down to actually record it, when we got to the part where we were like, talking about the documentary, The Imposter, that was what we were using for our first episode. She was just cracking me up and I wasn't expecting it at all. And I kind of like, it threw me off. But like kind of in a fun way, we kind of just decided to go with it. And then when I was like listening back to it and sort of putting that first episode together and I got to that part, I was like, this is really funny. Like the two of us recapping this documentary that we both really liked, it's really, really funny. And there's so many true crime podcasts out there, but there's not a single other one that does this. And I was like, I think maybe this is the podcast. And so we sort of stumbled into making this thing. It was not at all what we set out to make.
How long have you been doing it for?
We've been making True Crime Obsessed, I think, for 2.5 years now. We've both been podcasting for maybe 5 or 6 years, but for True Crime Obsessed is about 2.5 years.
How did you grow it to be so big? It sounds like 2.5 years is a long time, but to have that many, people downloading every month your episodes, I mean, that doesn't happen by accident.
No, I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to make a true crime podcast because we're really fascinated by it, but also we knew that like Jillian and I were both at a point in our lives and our careers where we're like, I really wanted to see if there was any way of making a living as a podcaster, and so we thought the true crime genre would be a good place to start because it's a very popular genre. And when we got into it and we got a really good reaction from it, we kind of just did everything we could. Like, I always say that like people that are starting out, like you build a podcast audience one person at a time. Yeah. So, we got on social media and, I wasn't good at social media when we started. I sort of learned what works and started doing a lot of that. We were really like careful to make sure we responded to every email we got. We started, buying Facebook ads in the beginning, which weren't, we were spending like $25 or $30 a week on Facebook ads and really like studying how you could grow a podcast. And it was like, honestly, we just learned about it by doing it and by, reaching out to other podcasters that were more successful than us, asking what they had done. And that was really it, and then I think that we had a little bit of a leg up because there wasn't anything else out there like us. I think that like if people were looking for something new and they found us, they either liked us or hated us. I mean, in those 18,000 reviews, I'm sure you saw some of them. Like they're not all nice. They're not all good reviews. Like we always say, we are not for everybody.
Yeah, it's funny. Okay, go ahead. You finish. Sorry. Hello.
Oh, yeah. Are you there?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say that I wrote one down that it wasn't a bad review. It was just something that caught my eye that I think is hysterical, right? And
please tell me.
It's from Marge 2821, and it was a positive, like I love your podcast, but she was complaining that you have ads. She's like, I wish you could tone down the ads.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
I get it. We like it's sort of like, what are you supposed to do? Like we try really hard to make our ads fun and funny and fast. Like we try not to drag them out. We try to make them engaging. We have a Patreon, and so one of the tiers on our Patreon is that you can get ad-free episodes. And I will say, like some of the feedback we got was like, why would I want that? Like I love the ads.
Right.
So listen, Marge, I get it. I don't like listening to ads on podcasts either, but it's like. We got to keep the lights on.
Yeah, I know, right? It's funny because we've only been doing this since the summer, right? And we're about to hit our 50th episode. And because we've sort of had a very quick trajectory up, mainly because like what you said, I've just been very active in social media and promoting it, and we've luckily had some really great guests like yourself on that just by going through their network of social media, it really helped us build our audience. And,
Totally.
up until recently, we've been solicited for ads and sponsorships and stuff like that. And I've been reluctant to do it until we just actually took our first one from which makes a lot of sense to us. It's called Manscaped. I'm sure you're familiar with Manscaped.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So they came on recently as a sponsor. I think it's hysterical, but obviously speaks to the core of our audience. And for, but, again, it's not like some huge top, middle, bottom thing. We're not running crazy, lengthy stuff. But at some point, I'm sure we'll get to that. And I know we're going to get tons of, people are going to be like, what's with all the ads? And I'm like, well, it's free.
Exactly. That's what I always say. Exactly.
It's like, it's free. Like, what's the 15 seconds costing you? Like, give me a break.
Exactly.
I got to shave.
It's also like, sure, everybody has that little 15-second skip ahead button on your, like you're in charge of your own destiny.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, there's been a kind of like a resurgence last couple of years. There's all these like serial killer docs and all this stuff coming out on Netflix. Has that, you think, contributed to like boosting you guys a little bit? Like people get more interested. They like watch, like, for example, the Ted Bundy tapes, and they're like, I want more.
Yeah.
And then they kind of come over to you guys.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think like some of the feedback that we get really consistently is that like people feel like when they listen to our episodes that like they're having a conversation with their friends, like that, like that, or that they would have with their friends if they all watched the documentary together. And I think in general, people love recap stuff. Like I think people love to see something and then like listen to a conversation about it or participate in a conversation about it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how we sort of came around at exactly the same time that like true crime documentaries really started to take off. Back in the beginning, we were sort of worried that we were going to run out of stuff to cover. And now when I look at our list of like documentaries, it carries us through like the next 4 years, like they're just pumping that stuff out. So yeah, I really do think that people it's why you see a lot of documentaries make their own companion podcasts, like McMillions had a companion podcast and Chernobyl had a companion podcast. And, it's one of those things where people just want more of it.
Makes sense.
What to you, like, what was the first true crime documentary that really exploded onto the scene, Netflix or wherever you might have seen it over the course of the last couple of years? I mean, I have one in mind, even though I'm not, the most avid person up on it, but I'm just curious as to what you would attribute it to or what you would say it would be.
God, I mean, I always think about, for me, like one of the first true crime documentary series I ever watched was, oh man, I'm going to forget the name of it now. It was the HBO series about the West Memphis Three. And it was called, I can't think of, it was. I
know what you're talking about.
I can't. Yeah, and there was another documentary that came out a few years ago called West of Memphis, which was like an all-inclusive, documentary about that case. It's going to bug me that I can't think of it. But it was a Joe Berlinger documentary. It was like over the years they made 3 of them. So that was the first one that I can think of. What were you thinking of?
Making a Murderer.
Oh, yeah. Making a Murderer was one of the first ones. If I'm remembering this correctly, Making a Murderer was one of the first ones that dropped all their episodes at once. And I think that made a big difference too, because people were used to having to like wait a week for the next thing. Right. Even if you think about like Serial, the podcast, like, it was a weekly thing. And then Making a Murderer came out and dumped all 10 episodes of the first season at once. And people went crazy. And I remember The Jinx came out right after that. And The Jinx was like week by week. And people were super pissed about it because like Netflix had spoiled people by dropping everything at once as a binge.
Yeah, the binge watching thing definitely, dropping everything at one time really changed the entire landscape, more so than just Netflix and the streaming services did, of how people consume media. It really, it's totally changed everything, and people now just don't, they just expect it. It's like, I want it all at one time.
It's really true. I know. And I think that a lot of the models of how these things get made has shifted to that because people don't have the patience anymore. I mean, it really, like, Making a Murderer really, like, changed the culture of how we watch things, like you were just saying.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, my main line of work is in entertainment consumer products, right? So we work with all all the movie studios on their tentpole films and their library titles, ranging, and you name it, from every studio, most companies, Netflix, Amazon, all of them. And it's really an interesting, challenging time for them when they're trying to get their stuff or put it out on their streaming services all at one time, but then build an affinity to that program or that character, because you drop 10 episodes of whatever it is, Billions, and then the people who are into Billions watch it over a weekend, and then they don't watch it again for a year and a half.
And that's so interesting too, because when you're dealing with like narrative stuff like that, that's coming back in the next season. I remember thinking, like, when we were catching up on like Mad Men or whatever it was, like we were catching up to like the second to the last season. So we watched it all as a binge, and then it was like 2 months before it was coming back on, and we're like, wait, we don't remember anything.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to do it that way.
What's your Patrick, what would you say would be, I know it's probably hard to narrate, story or like favorite?
You're breaking up, Nick.
All right.
Oh, I lost you.
All right, I'm back. So what's your favorite true crime story, or like your favorite, like maybe serial killer that you guys covered that you like? It was a story that just like you're obsessed with and you're like, I can't believe this happened.
I've got a couple of them. There was I'm really fascinated by the serial killer Israel Keys. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, and that's part of what is fascinating about him. He's a modern, like, he's from modern times. I think I don't have all the dates at my fingertips, but he was caught, I'm going to say, like, within the last 10 years, and he was a young guy. I mean, he was like in his 30s when they caught him, and his story was just so crazy. Like, he lived in Alaska, and he would plan his killing sprees sort of like years in advance, and he was really meticulous about it. Like, a lot of serial killers can be, like, apparently are more impulsive, but he would do a thing where he would tell his family, like his wife, that he was going to go fishing for the weekend by himself, and he'd actually get on a plane to New Hampshire, where he would bury what they call, and this is a disgusting term, so please forgive me, but he would bury what was called like a kill kit, which was like a bucket that had like a gun and knives and cash and, rope and things like that. And then he'd get on the plane and go home. And then 2 years later, he'd go back to New Hampshire and find somebody random to kill. And that was why it was so hard to catch him, was because like the killings were random, and, he didn't have a pattern, and he didn't have an MO of the kind of, person that he was looking for. And when they caught him, he was, I'm trying to remember the exact circumstances of his being caught, but he had it was one of those things where he had like a broken tail light or something, and he got pulled over, and they were able to figure out who he was, and he took his own life in jail after giving the police like a 15-hour on-camera interview about like all of some of the killings that he did. And so there's all of this mystery surrounding like what other murders could he be responsible for, because they know that he was responsible for like at least 7 or 8, but he only took responsibility for like 2 or 3. So it's just like there's so much mystery surrounding that case that I found it really fascinating. And yeah, so I would say in like recent times, that's the one that I'm the most sort of fascinated by, which is weird and morbid, I know, but it's what I do for a living, I guess.
No, I mean, it's why those things are a hit, and like that's what's this dude's name? I want to look this up after.
And by the way, it's always the out tail light that gets you caught. Always.
Every single time. We make this joke on the podcast in every episode. It's like, you guys, if you're gonna be a serial killer, please get your taillights fixed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's how you get caught every time.
I mean, how many cars do you drive by in a day that don't have taillights? I don't even see that many, and it's obvious if I do, they're all fucking criminals.
They're all serial killers. It's a telltale sign. That's how you can tell. But yeah, his name is Israel Keys, and Oxygen did like a 2-part documentary series on him. And if I could give a plug to another podcast. It's a great podcast called True Crime Bullshit. And it's the first series is like an 18-part documentary series on Israel Keys. And the reason it's called that is because that was one of the things that he said in his like 15-hour long interview, was that he didn't want his story getting out in the press because he didn't want like there to be like, true crime bullshit, like exactly what was done, the Oxygen series and us talking about him right now. It's great. If you're interested in knowing more about his case, it's a great podcast.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Usually those guys want to be known and they want like to be
Right.
like they want the recognition, and for him to be like, nah, I don't want this to get out. Like he looked at it as like a job, and the way he planned it out, that's
Yes.
insane.
It's really, really crazy. And like some of the stuff that he did is just like so hard to believe. And there's video, like there's one of his victims was a young woman who worked at a coffee hut in Alaska, like one of those coffee huts that like it's like a one person operation in the middle of a parking lot. And there's the actual video of him kidnapping her, and you can see it on YouTube. It's just terrifying to watch.
Ugh.
Was there
Yeah.
any reason why he started? Like, was it because usually they dive into like their childhood, their dad beat them, this one kicked them in the face
Yep.
when they were a kid.
That one was a comedian.
It's interesting, right? You know, they asked him that question in that FBI interview, and he says no. He says like he was just born this way, and that's just how he was. And you know, it's so interesting too. Like one of the more recent cases we covered was Jeffrey Dahmer, and it's a similar thing where Jeffrey Dahmer gave an interview to this reporter, and he was really honest with her about like his life and his growing up, and how, you know, he says that there was no trauma in his background that made him do this, that he was just born this way, and he fought it as long as he could, but then he couldn't fight it anymore. Just, it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
it's
blows my mind.
I know.
So like what do you think is like, what do you attribute just the fanaticism for true crime being so freaking popular right now, where it like dominates the top podcasts, radio shows, whatever they are? You know, it's dominated by crime. Like, do you
know, it's something I give a lot of thought to, because it's like, you know, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, I think like historically, you know, horror movies have always been really popular. I think there's something about like culture that we like to be scared. We like to scare ourselves. We like to watch Friday the 13th or whatever and like be scared. So I think that's part of it. You know, I think another part of it is that, you know, these true crime podcasts or documentaries or whatever, the victim is so often just like a normal person, you know, just like you or me or anybody that something really bad randomly happened to. And I think that people are sort of fascinated by that aspect of it too, that like it could have been me, it wasn't me, you know, like we're all lucky to be alive. And, you know, you sort of want to like understand the circumstances that sort of made this terrible thing happen to this normal person. And then you sort of like look at your own life. And so I think those, and the other thing too is that usually true crime documentaries or true crime podcasts tell a really compelling story, because, you know, there's either a great mystery surrounding it and it's endlessly fascinating to work through the pieces of that, or, you know, the tragedy happened, we know who it happened to, and we know who did it and why, and the storytelling is usually very good. So, I mean, those are the factors that I think sort of make the true crime genre so compelling for people.
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that it's so big. I mean, I get it. You know, they're obviously, you know, we interviewed someone recently that said, you know, if you have good stories, you're going to make it, you're going to be popular and whatever it is. And there's nothing better than a good crime story.
Yeah, totally.
You know? So speaking of crime stories, staying on topic, what do you think about The Tiger King?
It's so interesting. So I haven't watched it yet, but you know, we get a lot of requests from our listeners. And do you remember when that documentary on Netflix came out a few months ago, the Don't F with Cats documentary?
The which one?
It was called Don't Fuck with Cats.
Yeah.
No, I don't actually. But now I'm gonna
It was
have
a huge thing on Netflix, and we got inundated with requests for it. And my co-host Julian has a real serious animal thing. Like, it's, you know, we deal with like very dark, horrible things all the time, but like with animal abuse is sort of the thing that like is like a bridge too far for her. So we decided that we weren't going to do that. And then we got so many requests for it that we did it. And we thought like we would never again get so many requests for a thing. But then The Tiger King came out, and everything short of skywriting to us to get us to do it. Right. Like hundreds of DMs, hundreds of emails, Facebook messages, just constant inundation with it. And so we're going to do it. I watched the first few minutes of the first episode just to get a sense of it. It seems bananas to me. But it sort of has all of the elements of like what our listeners love, which is like a weird gay guy, animals and murder. So like, here we go. Perfect for us.
And they're supposed to be dropping another episode this week, possibly today.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Maybe tomorrow. I don't even know what day it is. I think Wednesday, maybe.
I know.
But yeah,
I know.
I read in one of the trades that they're dropping another episode. They taped it last week, right? Because of all the stuff going on. And then, you haven't watched it yet. I'm sure you know enough about it. But
yeah, I know it's all anybody's talking about right now.
Yeah, it definitely plays into your stuff for sure. I was just curious.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm kind of surprised you haven't seen it yet. You're the only one. You're the holdout.
Well, you know what it is, and you guys could probably relate to this. Like the podcasting business is like one of the few industries that like the work hasn't stopped. So I have been flat out working. I mean, I'm working like 50 hours a week to just keep up with our regular podcast and our Patreon episode that we put out every month. So like really the only time I ever have to watch anything is when I'm preparing to do the episode. And so I just haven't gotten there yet. But I know. I'm the only person on earth who hasn't seen it.
Yeah, you'll enjoy it, I'm sure. I'm not a cat person. But I was like, I watched the first like 10 minutes and I'm like, I couldn't wait. Like, I don't watch everything in one day. I can't do that. But I watched the whole thing over the course of like 3 days, and I couldn't wait for the next day to start so I could get to my Tiger King episode.
Yeah, I cannot wait to watch it.
Because like most of my watching is I'm usually like on a plane every week somewhere, and most of my watching is always done on planes. And now that I've been at home, basically with nothing to do, I've barely watched anything except Tiger King.
It's so funny. I wonder what makes it so compelling. I really think the formula for these things is like character driven. Like the more outrageous, the better. But there's something about Tiger King that has just caught fire in a way that like so few things do.
Well, it's all those things. It's the characters are fantastic. It's so like unbelievable yet true story. And just when you think they can't top the last guy, the next dude walks in and you're like, nope, he's got even less teeth than the other dude. And I didn't think anyone still wore Affliction t-shirts. And then walks in this guy and you're like, holy shit. It can't get any better, right? And then it ends on a huge cliffhanger. So like,
is that right?
Yeah, it's I shouldn't have said that. I apologize, but
okay.
You'll see. They're going to drop this other episode tomorrow, and then you read the description, you're going to know what the hell it is. Anyway, so how did you and your co-host get together?
So we were both making podcasts in the Broadway world, and we just sort of met that way. And we, I'm 42, and I always say that, like, I guess I met Jillian when I was like 39. It's a very weird thing to like as a grown up. Like I'm married, I've got a kid. It's a very weird thing to like then make a new friend. Like that is not a thing that happens very often in people's adult lives, I feel like. Yeah. And so when Jillian and I met and we started hanging out, I was like, oh my God, you're a really cool person. Like I actually want to like invest in a friendship with you. And so we did, and that was like, it really, we just started hanging out, and it didn't take us 2 weeks before we're like, we need to make something together. Like, I think we would be a good combination for a thing. And that was it. That was really it.
So what did you guys do in Broadway? What was your history there?
So my first podcast was a podcast called Theater People. And basically what happened, it was like 2009, and I had a long commute on the subway to work, and I discovered podcasts, and I found this Broadway podcast called Downstage Center, where this guy was just like interviewing these like big Broadway stars, and I loved it. And then it just went away, like he stopped making it, and I kind of just assumed that somebody would keep doing it. Like it was, to me, it was like such a great thing, and nobody did. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna do it then. And so I learned, I like bought podcasting equipment, and I sort of figured out how to record audio, not very well at the time. And I started reaching out to Broadway actors, and, they said yes. And so I sort of just created this podcast. I was one of like 2 Broadway themed podcasts that existed at the time. And over the course of like the 3 years that I was making that show, a whole bunch of new podcasts came around. And Jillian, her other podcast that she still makes is called the Hamilcast, which is the official podcast for Hamilton. And, Yeah, and so that, like that's it. I gave up my theater podcast when I decided to do True Crime Obsessed full time and like really try to make a living doing it. And Jillian still does the Hamilcast, and she's had every member of the cast on. They basically, the format is they come to her house, and Lin-Manuel Miranda came over to her house for 4 hours, and they got drunk and recorded like 4 hours of audio. Like it's really, really cool stuff.
Wow,
that's pretty awesome.
Fucking incredible, man.
Yeah.
What where do you see, like, are you doing the podcast full time now? Like this is your full time job? Or do you have
this is my full time job. So I was about a year ago, my husband quit his full time job to manage us. We were sort of like growing so fast that we needed a manager. So he quit, and that's what he does now. And so my husband and I have taken sort of the success of True Crime Obsessed and have developed a podcast network. So we created the Obsessed Network. We just launched our second podcast, and we've got, I think, 3 more new shows launching this year. So yeah, this podcasting is like my full-time gig now.
Wow. Does it feel weird to be like, like this is what I do for a living now? Did you ever think like that's what you'd be doing?
It's so funny because I really, for a long time, when I was able to quit my job and then my husband quit his job and we were doing this full time, I was like, it was really weird to me at first. And then we just sort of got used to it. And then like when this whole crisis happened and all of a sudden, like, people are getting laid off and businesses are closing down. And we were sort of like, we make a podcast. Like, that's our job. Is that a thing that is going to survive the apocalypse? So now it feels a little bit weird again, but for a good period, it felt like a regular job.
That's pretty awesome. It's it's interesting because me and Nick started also working on some other podcasts that we're co-producing that are just getting out there now, and obviously the runway to go from nothing to where you could actually make some money is long, unless you get really lucky. So me and Nick developed, started taking our show from the air onto like a theater format, which we did the first one now 2 months ago, which was incredibly successful. We basically sold out our first show ever, or close to sold. It wasn't totally sold out, but it was very close. In a room, traditional theater, and that's what we're looking to do. To take it out more. Obviously, now that's going to be grossly delayed. But I saw you guys do that too. So how do you do your show live? Is it a Q&A? What does the run of show look like?
Yeah, our live shows is for me like it's my favorite part of doing this whole thing. And it is a bummer. We had sold out like 8 cities, and we had to like postpone literally everything. We also are like we're playing Broadway. We're going to be the first podcast to ever like play live on Broadway.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that is scheduled for June 1st, but I think we're going to have to delay that too. I mean, so our live shows are pretty much the podcast. Like on our podcast, we recap true crime documentaries, and so when you listen to it, like in the audio form, it's like us bantering, and then we play clips of audio from the documentary. So our live show is very similar, except we use video. So we'll take actual video clips from the documentary and do it that way. But it's so, our live shows are so crazy. Like I always say, they feel like a party. We always either like they're at a nightclub where there's a bar, or we do like a proper theater, but we always make sure there's a bar with lots of bartenders.
Yep.
And it's just crazy. Like, we do a comedy show, so it's like one part us sitting down and actually doing our live show and like recapping a documentary, but it's also like just us being silly and interacting with the audience. And, like by the end of it, I am always so exhausted. I feel like I've run a marathon.
Yeah, it's very crazy. I exactly the same way. We, our show obviously is a little different. It incorporates, a few other stand-up comedians do stand-up sets. It's basically like a long Tonight Show. We have a house band, and the band interacts with the comedians and us, and people interview us. We interview people, and we had a roast. And, it took me, me and Nick, like solid 2 months to produce that show. And then obviously we did the show. It was 2.5 hours. And when it was done, I slept for like 3 weeks.
Yeah. But isn't it a great show? I mean, like, there's nothing like getting to do it in front of an audience. That is, for me, that is like the best. You know, we love our listeners. We are very like we interact with our listeners a lot on social media, but we never get to meet anybody. So when we actually get to like go on the road and do the show live, it's so amazing to be in the room. Like it's a weird feeling to like, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this too. Like when you're sitting up there, you're like, oh my God, these people paid. They got babysitters, some of them. You know what I mean? Like they are here. They came to see us do this thing. It's so validating and so much fun.
Yeah, it was awesome, and it was funny because, and I'm sure people, you know, your fans came up to you afterwards, and most of the people that came up to me, and I'm sure Nick too, were like, we came to this because of, you know, you guys and know you or whatever. But we had no idea what to expect. We were expecting this to suck, and it was awesome. Like, and to your point, like we basically just threw a party on a stage for our friends and people that paid. But we had a few hundred people, and you know, I looked at Nick after. I'm like, I don't know half of these people. I did more than half, and they just showed up because either they listened to the podcast, they saw it advertised, and they showed up. And we definitely produced a killer time for those people, which is all the validation in the world.
Congratulations. That really is such an accomplishment, you know. I mean, really, congratulations. It's when we started doing our live shows, the first one that we did was at this little tiny like cabaret space in New York City. It was like 126 seats or whatever. And we sold it out, and we were so excited, you know, and like we were so into it that we're like, we got to keep doing this and keep building this and building it and building it. And you know, for this last tour, the one that we were just about to start, we were selling out like almost 1,000-seat theaters.
Wow!
And it's just a bummer to be like, to put that on hold. It's crushing, you know.
Yeah, we had our first, you know, out of that, you know, we booked a show at a comedy club in Manhattan 2 weeks ago. We obviously had to cancel it. Oh God! And then we have another one in June, also like you, that, you know, we're hopeful that can still happen, but you know, who knows at this point.
I know,
but it really is awesome, and obviously when, you know, I'm sure, you know, if you keep your show in June, me and Nick will come check it out.
Oh my God, that'd be amazing.
So what's on the horizon for you guys? Like, where you take, besides the live show, where are you going to take it from here?
So we've got a lot of stuff in the works. So right now, you know, we've got the live tour that we're going to get back on the seat. You know, we're going full throttle with our podcast network. So we've got another new show coming out at the end of May, and then another new show coming out in July. And so that's kind of like, that's what we've got going on now. We're looking at some TV projects potentially. And, you know, just continuing to like sort of grow this brand and, you know, keep getting out there and meeting people and touring more, you know, ramping that up, playing Broadway, which is just both Jillian and I, is like just such a dream come true.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just weird. It's like everything feels like it's on pause right now, but we're really looking forward to getting back to it as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, we definitely identify with that for sure. We
can't
wait for things to get back to normal.
I have to keep reminding myself, like, this isn't just happening to me. You know what I mean? I'm like, there are people out there, like, dying. Like, this is a really tragic time. Like, I have to just, like, not be a dick about how it's affecting me.
Yeah, right.
I feel you, man. Well, Patrick, we want to thank you, man, for taking time, you know, today, especially being away and with everything going on, taking time to talk with us and teaching us some things on how to run a successful podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, guys. This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to get to talk to other podcasters.
Yeah, right. We really appreciate the time. Obviously, most importantly, hope you and your family stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Get through all this stuff as soon as possible and back on a stage someplace sooner than later.
Yeah, well, you too.
Yeah, man, thanks.
Guys.
And we'll absolutely keep in touch, and good luck with your podcasts and then other podcasts in 2020 and beyond.
Anything else you want to plug? I mean, not that you need our help, but...
No, that's it. Thank you for letting me just sort of like talk, you know, ramble away at what's going on over here. But no, this is so great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Really appreciate it.
All right, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks.